France, 1943. A German sentry walks his post outside a munitions depot. Third watch. 2 in the morning. Routine patrol route. 20 yards. Turn. 20 yards back. He has walked this route for 6 months. Nothing ever happens. Tonight something does. A shadow moves behind him. No sound. No warning. The sentry feels pressure on his lapel, as if someone brushed past him. He turns. Nobody there. He completes his patrol, walks 15 more yards, and collapses. The blade that entered between his ribs was 2 inches long. The weapon that delivered it fit entirely inside a coat lapel, and the resistance fighter who used it walked away carrying nothing larger than a fountain pen. The Office of Strategic Services called it a thumb dagger. British Special Operations executive agents called it a lapel knife. German security forces never figured out what was killing their sentries, because the weapon disappeared the moment it was used. Conventional fighting knives failed at covert operations. The Fairbairn-Sykes Dagger, standard issue for British commandos, measured 7 inches in the blade. Excellent weapon, completely useless for undercover work. An agent could not walk through a German checkpoint carrying a 7-inch blade. Searches found it. Questions followed. Arrest, interrogation, execution. The blade that worked brilliantly for commando raids became a death sentence for spies operating in occupied territory. Resistance fighters needed something different. A weapon invisible to searchers, small enough to hide in clothing seams, sharp enough to kill silently, and deployable in seconds by someone with minimal combat training. Traditional weapons design focused on battlefield effectiveness. The OSS needed something that prioritized concealment over every other factor. British intelligence services began experimenting with miniaturized blades in 1941. The concept was simple: reduce a fighting knife to absolute minimum dimensions while maintaining lethality. The challenge was determining those minimum dimensions. How short could you make a blade and still reach vital organs? How small could you make a handle and still maintain grip during a violent encounter? The answer emerged from medical knowledge combined with close combat expertise. The human heart sits approximately 3 to 4 inches below the surface of the chest, depending on body type. The kidneys, equally vulnerable, sit at similar depth. A blade 2 inches long could reach these organs if driven with sufficient force at the correct angle. That became the design parameter. 2-inch blade, enough to kill. Small enough to hide anywhere. The handle presented greater challenges. A conventional knife handle provided leverage and grip security, but conventional handles measured 4 to 5 inches. Too large, too obvious during searches. The OSS designers reduced the handle to thumb width, literally. The grip portion measured approximately 1 inch in diameter, just wide enough to pinch between thumb and forefinger. This created an entirely new fighting technique. Conventional knife fighting used a full grip, weapon held firmly in the fist. The thumb dagger required what instructors called a fencing grip. The blade pinched between thumb and index finger, remaining fingers curled against the palm. This grip provided less power, but allowed extraordinary concealment and lightning deployment. Production began at multiple locations. Some thumb daggers came from British manufacturers. Others were fabricated at OSS workshops in the United States. The simplest versions, made in India, were ground from pitchfork tines. These improvised weapons lacked elegance, but worked perfectly. A 3-inch piece of sharpened steel with cord wrapped around one end for grip. Total production cost, perhaps 50 cents. Lethality, identical to versions costing $50. Specifications varied but followed consistent patterns. Overall length ranged from 3 to 6 inches. Blade length stayed between 2 and 3 inches. Double-edged design allowed thrusting from any angle. Some versions included a small lanyard hole at the base of the handle. A cord looped through this hole and wrapped around the user's hand prevented the weapon from being lost during struggle. Distribution reached OSS agents and resistance networks across Europe, By 1942, each blade came with specific concealment and deployment instructions. The weapon could be sewn into coat lapels, hidden up sleeves, concealed in boot seams, worn on a neck cord, under clothing. The sheath, often a simple leather pouch, could be stitched directly into garments. A German soldier searching a suspect might find identification papers, perhaps a concealed pistol. He would never find a blade sewn flat against the inside of a jacket collar. Training for the thumb dagger differed completely from conventional knife combat. Instructors, primarily William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, taught agents to think of the weapon not as a knife, but as an extension of the hand. Deploy it like pointing a finger. Drive it forward with the entire body weight behind the thrust. Target specific points: between the ribs, base of the skull, kidney area, neck arteries. One strike. Maximum damage. Immediate withdrawal. If you are finding this examination of American unconventional weapons interesting, consider subscribing. It supports the channel and ensures you don't miss future deep dives. The Sentry removal technique became standard OSS and SOE training. The approach required absolute silence. Agents practiced stalking, moving without sound, timing their advance to match the sentry's routine. The attack itself took 3 seconds. Approach from behind. Left hand covers mouth and nose, preventing any outcry. Right hand drives the blade upward between the ribs into the heart. The sentry dies within seconds, often without understanding what happened. Field reports from IG. Occupied France confirmed effectiveness. Resistance cells reported multiple successful sentry removals using thumb daggers. German security forces discovered dead sentries with small puncture wounds, but no weapon nearby. Searches of nearby civilians found nothing. The blade, cleaned and returned to its concealment, left no trace. Investigations stalled. The killings continued. One documented case from Belgium involved a rail junction guarded by Wehrmacht soldiers. Resistance fighters needed to plant explosives, but sentries patrolled the approach routes. 2 agents, both women, carried thumb daggers concealed in their coat linings. They approached the junction separately, appearing as workers returning from night shifts. The first sentry checked identification papers, found nothing suspicious, waved them through. 30 seconds later, he collapsed. The second agent repeated the process with another sentry 50 yards away. Both women reached the junction, planted explosives, and departed before bodies were discovered. The psychological impact on German forces exceeded the tactical results. Sentries became paranoid. Every civilian became a potential threat. Soldiers requested transfer from occupation duty. Training emphasized constant vigilance, but provided no defense against a weapon invisible until the moment of attack. How do you defend against something you cannot see or anticipate? German counterintelligence attempted to identify the weapon. Autopsy reports showed narrow, deep puncture wounds consistent with a stiletto or thin blade, but searches of suspects revealed nothing. Some reports theorized resistance fighters were using modified ice picks or sharpened wire. Others suggested the wounds came from small crossbow bolts fired at close range. None identified the actual weapon, a 2-inch blade hidden in clothing. The thumb dagger represented American weapons development at its most practical. Not the most powerful weapon, not the most sophisticated, but perfectly suited to its mission. Concealment mattered more than stopping power. Surprise mattered more than range. And a weapon that could be carried through enemy checkpoints without detection mattered more than one that could win a firefight. British SOE issued similar weapons to agents throughout the war. Some versions were even smaller, essentially sharpened needles with minimal handles. These weapons, sometimes called commando nails or hat pins, could be concealed in the seam of a jacket or the lining of a hat. Agents deployed them the same way: quick thrust to vital areas, immediate withdrawal, and concealment. Post-war analysis revealed the thumb dagger saw extensive use across all theaters: Europe, Pacific, China, everywhere. OSS and SOE operated. Exact numbers remain classified, but training records suggest thousands of agents received instruction in thumb dagger deployment and use. Not all used them. Many never faced situations requiring silent killing. But every agent who Yosemite carried one understood its purpose. Last resort, final option, the weapon you used when everything else failed. The design influenced post-war intelligence operations. The Central Intelligence Agency, successor to the OSS, continued developing miniaturized weapons for covert operatives. Modern versions use advanced materials, stronger alloys, better edge retention, but the fundamental concept remains unchanged. A blade small enough to hide anywhere, sharp enough to kill silently, simple enough that anyone can use it effectively with minimal training. That simplicity mattered most. A resistance fighter was not a trained commando. Most were ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, teachers, factory workers who chose to fight occupation. They needed weapons that worked without extensive training. The thumb dagger delivered. 3 seconds of instruction. Grip like this. Thrust like this. Target here. Done. German forces never developed an effective countermeasure. They could not search thoroughly enough to find weapons sewn into clothing. They could not guard sentries closely enough to prevent silent approaches, and they could not train soldiers to defend against attacks they could not see coming. The thumb dagger exploited vulnerabilities in occupation security that no amount of training or vigilance could eliminate. The weapon proved that American innovation extended beyond tanks and aircraft into the smallest, simplest tools. A 2-inch blade, a thumb-width handle, total weight, perhaps 2 ounces, and the capability to kill a German sentry without drawing attention, without leaving evidence, without carrying anything that looked like a weapon. Resistance networks across Europe understood its value, not for assaulting fortified positions, not for pitched battles, but for the quiet work of resistance, removing sentries, eliminating collaborators, creating access for sabotage operations, the work that happened in shadows, where silence mattered more than firepower. That German sentry outside the munitions depot never knew what killed him. The weapon entered and exited before his nervous system processed the injury. The resistance fighter who struck him walked away, blade cleaned and concealed, indistinguishable from any other civilian on a dark street. And somewhere in occupied France, another sentry began his patrol, unaware that the most dangerous weapon he faced that night was smaller than his thumb. The OSS thumb dagger represented unconventional warfare at its essence. Not the biggest, not the loudest, just the most effective for its specific mission, and that mission was simple: kill silently, disappear completely, leave no trace. American engineering solved the problem with 2 inches of sharpened steel and absolute commitment to concealment. The weapon that fit in a lapel, the blade that disappeared, the thumb that killed German sentries without ever drawing attention. And that was precisely the point.